The emergency lights bathed the xenobiology laboratory in harsh red as students scrambled over desks and chairs in their desperate flight toward the exits. Professor Cole's forearms waved frantically as he tried to maintain order, but his usually calm Centaurian voice cracked with panic. The containment field had failed, and the most dangerous specimen in the Academy's collection was now loose somewhere in the room. 23 students from across the galaxy pressed themselves against the sealed emergency doors, their various breathing apparatus fogging up as fear filled the air with a dozen different pheromones. Tan, whose Drakmor warrior training had prepared him for countless battles, found his confidence shaken as his sensitive hearing picked up the creature's movements somewhere in the darkness. Unit 47's optical sensors swept the room in precise patterns, calculating escape routes that simply didn't exist, now that the security protocols had locked them all inside. The Crimson Reaper had been the day's final demonstration, a perfect example of evolution's cruelest experiments from the death world of Infernus 7, where survival required either perfect camouflage or lethal efficiency. This particular specimen measured nearly 15 centimeters long, its segmented body covered in scales that shifted from deep burgundy to brilliant scarlet depending on its mood. Professor Cole had spent 30 minutes explaining how a single bite contained enough neurotoxin to drop a full-grown Drakmor warrior in seconds, how its mandibles could crack through most known armor materials, and how its species had been responsible for the evacuation of 3 entire colony worlds. Petal's flower-like head trembled as she pressed her delicate form against the far wall, her natural bioluminescence flickering in distress patterns that made the other students even more nervous. Wave's gills flapped rapidly in the recycled air, her aquatic physiology struggling with the stress hormones flooding the atmosphere. Even the normally unshakable students from the ice worlds of the Outer Rim looked pale as they watched Professor Cole frantically work at his emergency console. The containment field's power coupling must have overloaded during the presentation, Professor Cole announced, his voice carrying the slight whistle that indicated extreme stress in his species. I'm trying to restore it, but the backup systems are cycling through their startup sequence. We need at least 10 more minutes before I can safely re-establish the barrier. 10 minutes felt like an eternity when sharing space with a creature that galactic databases listed as Threat Level Omega, Immediate Termination Protocols Authorized. Tan's military training kicked in as he scanned the room for makeshift weapons, but everything sharp or heavy had been secured in the safety lockdown. Unit 47 ran probability calculations that painted an increasingly grim picture. With each passing second, their chances of emerging unharmed dropped by measurable percentages. That's when someone noticed Alex. The human sat calmly at their desk, in the third row, completely ignoring the chaos surrounding them as they continued taking notes in their peculiar handwritten script. While 22 other beings pressed themselves against walls and furniture, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the invisible threat, Alex seemed almost oblivious to the danger. Their pen moved steadily across the paper, occasionally pausing as they appeared to consider some particularly interesting point from the earlier lecture. Human, Tan's voice cut through the nervous chatter with military precision. You need to move away from the center of the room. That creature could be anywhere, and you're completely exposed in that position. Alex looked up with the kind of mild confusion, usually reserved for someone being interrupted during light reading. Oh, I know exactly where it is, they said in that strange, flat tone humans used when stating obvious facts. It's been hiding under Professor Cole's demonstration table for the last few minutes, probably confused by all the noise and new smells. The statement sent a fresh wave of terror through the assembled students. Unit 47's sensors immediately focused on the indicated area, confirming the human's observation with a series of soft electronic beeps. Indeed, thermal imaging revealed a small warm signature beneath the heavy metal table where Professor Cole kept his most dangerous specimens. How could you possibly know that? Professor Cole demanded, his 4 eyes rotating to focus on Alex with laser intensity. My own instruments couldn't locate it in this chaos. Alex shrugged with that uniquely human gesture that somehow managed to convey both helplessness and complete confidence simultaneously. It's scared, they explained, as if this observation clarified everything. When most creatures are overwhelmed, they look for small, dark spaces where they can hide until the danger passes. It's basic survival behavior. The logic seemed sound, but it did nothing to ease the tension in the room. Wave's translated voice carried a slight tremor as her speech device converted her clicking sounds into standard Galactic. Knowing where the predator hides doesn't make it less deadly. If anything, cornering a dangerous animal makes it more likely to attack. Professor. Cole nodded emphatically, all four of his hands working frantically at different control panels. Wave is absolutely correct. Cornered predators become exponentially more dangerous. Everyone needs to remain perfectly still while I work on the containment protocols. But Alex was already moving. The human stood with that peculiar grace their species displayed when completely confident in their actions, reaching for the simple wooden pointer Professor Cole had been using during the earlier demonstration. Other students watched in horrified fascination as Alex approached the table, where certain death waited in the shadows, the wooden stick held casually in one hand like some primitive tool from humanity's distant past. What are you doing? Petal's bioluminescent petals flashed in rapid warning patterns that hurt to look at directly. That creature can jump nearly 2 meters. You're walking directly into its attack range. Alex paused just long enough to offer what humans called a smile, that strange facial expression that could mean anything from genuine happiness to barely controlled madness. I'm going to say hello, they announced, as if introducing themselves to lethal alien predators was a perfectly normal social activity. Everything deserves a proper introduction, don't you think? The silence that followed Alex's announcement felt heavier than the artificial gravity generators that kept them all firmly planted on the laboratory floor. 22 alien students held their breath, or whatever respiratory function their species used, as the human knelt beside Professor Cole's demonstration table with nothing but a simple wooden stick for protection. Even Unit 47's normally constant electronic humming seemed muted, as if the android was afraid its processors might somehow attract the hidden predator's attention. Alex moved with deliberate slowness, the kind of patient care usually reserved for handling unstable explosive devices. The wooden pointer extended toward the table's shadowed recesses, and everyone in the room braced for the lightning-fast strike that would end the human's life in a spray of toxin and violence. Tan's warrior instinct screamed at him to intervene, but his military training also taught him not to startle dangerous predators during hunting sequences. Easy there, little fellow, Alex murmured in those soft human tones that seemed completely inappropriate for addressing one of the galaxy's most efficient killing machines. Nobody wants to hurt you. We're all just a bit scared and confused right now. The Crimson Reaper emerged from its hiding place with cautious movements that defied every xenobiology textbook ever written. Instead of the explosive attack posture, described in academic literature, the creature's antennae twitched curiously as it investigated the strange wooden offering. Its scales shifted from angry scarlet to a more neutral burgundy, and those mandibles that could supposedly crack armor remained relaxed and non-threatening. Professor Cole's voice came out as barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might somehow trigger the violence everyone expected. This is impossible. Crimson Reapers attack anything that moves within their territory. The creature should have struck already. Alex continued their gentle coaxing, allowing the alien arthropod to explore the wooden stick with obvious interest. The creature's 6 legs found purchase on the smooth surface, and within moments it was perched there like some bizarre decoration rather than a weapon of mass destruction. It's not territorial behavior, Alex explained quietly, never taking their eyes off their new companion. It's fear response. When something is scared and cornered, aggression is usually the last resort, not the first choice. Wave's aquatic features showed confusion that transcended species barriers. Her translated voice carried tones of disbelief as she watched the impossible scene unfold. But the databases clearly state that these creatures show no capacity for complex behavioral adaptation. They're classified as pure predators with no social intelligence. The human's laugh carried that particular quality that suggested they found the universe endlessly amusing rather than terrifying. Databases are written by people who study creatures from behind force fields and containment barriers, Alex pointed out, gently rotating the stick so the Crimson Reaper could find a more comfortable position. How can you really understand something if you never actually interact with it? Unit 47's optical sensors focused intently on the interaction, recording every detail for later analysis. The android's vocal processors carried genuine curiosity, a trait that surprised everyone, including Unit 47 itself. The creature's biochemical markers suggest elevated stress hormones but not the combat stimulants typically associated with hunting behavior. Its posture indicates exploration rather than predation. Petal's bioluminescent display had shifted from panic warnings to fascinated observation patterns. "It's almost like it's trying to communicate," she whispered, her flower-like features tracking the Crimson Reaper's antenna movements. "See how it responds when Alex speaks? Those aren't random motions." Indeed, the creature seemed to react to human speech patterns with what could only be described as attention. When Alex spoke, the antennae would orient toward the sound source, and the creature's head would tilt in ways that suggested genuine listening. Professor Cole found himself leaning forward despite every instinct telling him to maintain maximum distance from the deadly specimen. "This contradicts 50 years of established research," he admitted, his four hands still hovering over emergency controls but no longer moving with panicked urgency. "Every encounter between sentient species and Crimson Reapers has resulted in immediate violence. There are no exceptions in the historical records." Alex considered this information while examining their new companion with obvious fascination. The creature had begun what could only be described as grooming behavior, using its front legs to clean its antennae in patterns that suggested comfort rather than preparation for attack. "Maybe the problem isn't with the creatures," the human suggested thoughtfully. "Maybe the problem is with how everyone else approaches them." Tan's military conditioning struggled with concepts that challenged everything he'd been taught about threat assessment. His people had fought these creatures on 3 different worlds, losing thousands of warriors to their speed and toxicity. "Humans," he said carefully, "my species has standing orders to terminate these beings on sight. They've been responsible for the deaths of entire battalions." The human nodded with understanding that somehow didn't diminish their obvious affection for the creature, now comfortably settled on their improvised perch. "That sounds terrible, and I'm sorry your people went through that," Alex said sincerely. "But think about it. If something scary suddenly appeared in your home and started making loud noises and threatening gestures, wouldn't you defend yourself?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything the assembled students thought they knew about interspecies relations. Unit 47's processors worked overtime analyzing the behavioral data streaming from its sensors, correlating the observed reactions with established xenobiological theories. Wave's aquatic intelligence considered scenarios where her own people might be misunderstood by land-dwelling species who didn't understand their complex social signals. Professor Cole watched his most dangerous specimen exhibiting behaviors that should have been impossible according to every academic paper he'd ever read on the subject. The creature showed clear signs of curiosity, investigating its new environment with careful attention to detail. When Alex offered their free hand, the Crimson Reaper actually approached to investigate, its antennae gently touching human skin without any indication of aggressive intent. "The toxin production," Professor Cole mused aloud, his scientific mind wrestling with observations that challenged fundamental assumptions. "Perhaps it's triggered by stress responses rather than hunting instincts. If the creature doesn't perceive a threat, the biological weapon systems might remain inactive." Alex smiled with genuine warmth as the Crimson Reaper settled more comfortably on its wooden perch, occasionally reaching out to investigate interesting textures and scents in its immediate environment. "It's just trying to understand its situation," the human explained. "Same as any of us would do in a strange place surrounded by unfamiliar sounds and smells. Curiosity is pretty universal among intelligent species." The transformation in the laboratory's atmosphere was almost tangible, as students gradually moved closer to witness the impossible interaction between human and predator. What had begun as a crisis scenario was evolving into the most significant xenobiological breakthrough in recorded galactic history. The Crimson Reaper remained peacefully perched on Alex's wooden stick, occasionally tilting its head toward different speakers, as if following the conversation with genuine interest. Tan was the first to break the contemplative silence that had settled over the room. His warrior's posture remained rigid, but something in his expression suggested internal conflict between training and observation. "My people call these creatures Death's Shadow in our ancient language," he admitted, his translated voice carrying undertones of reluctant respect. "The Drakmor Empire has used them as biological weapons for over 2 centuries. We drop containment pods on enemy worlds and let the creatures establish hunting territories." Alex's expression shifted to something that might have been sadness. Though aliens often struggled to interpret human facial expressions accurately, "That sounds like a terrible way to live, why?" they said quietly, addressing both Tan and the creature. Being used as a weapon instead of being understood as a living being with its own needs and preferences, Unit 47's optical sensors registered the subtle changes in the Crimson Reaper's biochemistry as different students spoke. Fascinating. The creature's stress hormones spike when Tan describes military applications, but remain stable during neutral conversation. It appears capable of recognizing aggressive intent through vocal patterns and pheromone signatures. Waves. Aquatic features rippled with patterns that indicated deep thought. Her species had developed sophisticated communication systems based on subtle environmental cues, making them particularly sensitive to behavioral nuances. In the deep trenches of my homeworld, we have legends about creatures called void dancers, beings that bring death to any who encounter them. The descriptions match these Crimson Reapers perfectly, though our legends are thousands of years old. Professor Cole's scientific curiosity was overriding his earlier panic as he observed behavioral patterns that contradicted decades of established research. "The historical records show contact between your species and Crimson Reapers dating back millennia. That suggests a much wider natural distribution than current xenobiology models indicate." Petal's bioluminescent petals shifted to contemplative blue patterns as she shared her people's experiences. "The Floranian Council maintains strict quarantine protocols for any world where these creatures are detected," she admitted with visible discomfort. "We consider them to be manifestations of cosmic evil. Our philosophers teach that they exist purely to test the resolve of peaceful civilizations." Alex listened to each revelation while gently adjusting the wooden stick to help their companion find a more comfortable position. The creature seemed remarkably adaptable, occasionally extending one leg to investigate interesting sounds or movements in its environment. "It seems like everyone's afraid of them," Alex observed thoughtfully. "But maybe that fear comes from not understanding what they actually need to feel safe." The human began describing their homeworld's relationship with dangerous fauna, painting pictures that seemed almost fantastical to alien ears. Tales of creatures called wolves that had been transformed from pack hunters into loyal companions through patience and understanding. Stories of venomous serpents that some humans actually chose to share their homes with, forming bonds based on mutual respect rather than dominance. Even accounts of massive predatory cats that could crush human skulls with their jaws, yet had worked alongside people for centuries. On Earth, we learned that most aggressive behavior comes from fear, territory disputes, or resource competition, Alex explained while the Crimson Reaper investigated the sleeve of their academy uniform with obvious curiosity. Very few creatures are actually malicious. They're usually just trying to survive in environments that don't always provide what they need. Unit 47's analytical processes were working overtime as the android attempted to reconcile observed data with established xenobiological theories. "The implications are staggering," the artificial being announced. "If these creatures respond positively to non-threatening interaction protocols, it suggests that previous contact attempts may have failed due to approach methodology rather than inherent species incompatibility." Tan's military training had included extensive study of enemy psychology, but applying those same principles to the creatures his people used as weapons created uncomfortable cognitive dissonance. "You're suggesting that generations of warfare between our species and these beings might have been preventable?" he asked, his voice carrying tones of something that might have been regret. Alex considered the question seriously while observing their new companion's continued exploration of its immediate environment. The creature had begun what appeared to be play behavior, gently manipulating small objects within reach with careful precision that suggested intelligence rather than mere instinct. "I'm not qualified to judge military decisions," the human replied diplomatically. "But I can see that this particular individual seems capable of peaceful coexistence when treated with respect and understanding." Professor Cole found himself questioning fundamental assumptions that had shaped his entire academic career. The creature perched calmly on the human stick displayed cognitive flexibility that shouldn't exist according to established classifications. If we've been wrong about their behavioral capacity, what else might we have misunderstood about dangerous xenofauna? He wondered aloud. Wave's aquatic intelligence processed the implications with growing excitement. "My people avoid entire ocean regions because of monster sightings that might actually be misunderstood creatures seeking interaction rather than isolation. We could be sharing our worlds with potential allies instead of living in constant fear." The Crimson Reaper seemed to respond to the increasingly positive emotional atmosphere in the room by becoming even more relaxed and exploratory. It began investigating the textures and scents of different nearby objects, displaying what could only be described as curiosity about its new environment. When Petal cautiously extended one of her flower-like appendages, the creature approached to investigate with gentle antenna touches that made her bioluminescence shift to surprise delight patterns. "It's not trying to hurt anyone," she whispered, in amazement, her entire worldview shifting as she watched the supposedly demonic being examine her unique physiology with scientific interest. "It just wants to understand what it's encountering, the same way we're trying to understand it." Alex smiled with genuine warmth as they watched their new friend continue its peaceful exploration. "Understanding usually works both ways," they agreed. "When we approach something with curiosity instead of fear, we often discover that it's approaching us the same way." The laboratory had transformed from a place of terror into something resembling a philosophical discussion hall, as students gathered in a loose circle around Alex and their remarkably calm companion. The Crimson Reaper had begun exploring the extended wooden stick with what could only be described as playful curiosity, occasionally pausing to investigate interesting scents or sounds that caught its attention. Professor Cole found himself taking detailed notes on behavioral patterns that challenged everything he thought he knew about dangerous xenofauna. Unit 47 sensors detected elevated interest markers from every organic being in the room as Alex began sharing stories from humanity's long history of interspecies cooperation. The android's analytical program struggled to categorize these accounts within existing frameworks for predator-prey relationships, finding instead something entirely unprecedented in galactic databases. "We had creatures on Earth called tigers," Alex explained while gently adjusting the creature's position on its improvised perch. "Massive predators with claws longer than your fingers and jaws powerful enough to crush bones. They could kill a human with a single swipe. And for most of our history, we feared them as much as you fear these little ones." Tan's military conditioning made him automatically calculate threat assessments as Alex described these terrestrial predators. "Your species coexisted with such dangerous beings. How did you avoid constant warfare?" The human's smile carried that peculiar warmth that seemed to transform even the most serious conversations into opportunities for connection. "Some people learn to understand them instead of just fighting them," Alex replied. "They discovered that tigers weren't evil or malicious. They were just trying to survive and protect their families. When humans approached them with respect, instead of weapons, amazing things happened." Wave's aquatic features rippled with fascination as she processed this revolutionary concept. "You formed cooperative relationships with apex predators. That contradicts every survival instinct my species evolved." Alex nodded thoughtfully, while the Crimson Reaper investigated a particularly interesting texture on the wooden stick with careful antenna movements. "It wasn't easy, and it didn't work with every individual tiger," they admitted. "But some humans spent years learning tiger behavior, understanding their communication patterns, respecting their territorial needs. Eventually, a few tigers actually chose to work alongside humans." Professor Cole's four eyes widened with scientific astonishment as he contemplated the implications. Your species developed symbiotic relationships with creatures that could easily destroy you. The biological and psychological factors involved must have been incredibly complex. The classroom became an impromptu seminar on interspecies relations, as Alex continued sharing examples from Earth's diverse ecosystem. Stories of humans who swam with creatures called sharks, aquatic predators with razor-sharp teeth and attack, speeds that could tear a person apart in seconds, tales of people who shared their homes with serpents whose venom could kill in minutes, forming bonds based on mutual understanding rather than dominance or submission. My favorite example involves creatures we called wolves, Alex said, their voice carrying obvious affection for the subject. They were pack hunters with intelligence, strength, and coordination that made them incredibly dangerous to early humans. But instead of viewing them as eternal enemies, some humans learned wolf social structures and communication methods, petals. Bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors indicating deep curiosity as she leaned forward despite her species' natural caution. What happened when your people understood these wolf creatures? Alex's expression took on that quality humans displayed when sharing particularly meaningful memories. Over thousands of years, wolves and humans became partners in ways that benefited both species. The wolves became dogs, companions who helped humans hunt, protected human settlements, and provided emotional support. Dogs became so integrated with human society that we considered them family members rather than separate species. Unit 47's processors worked overtime analyzing the social dynamics Alex described, finding parallels to symbiotic relationships documented among various alien species. The transformation from predator-prey dynamics to cooperative partnership represents an evolutionary adaptation that extends beyond mere survival advantages, the android observed. It suggests capacity for emotional bonding across species barriers. Tan found himself reconsidering everything his warrior culture had taught him about dealing with dangerous fauna. "You're describing emotional connections with beings that could kill you," he said slowly. "That requires a level of trust that seems almost impossible from a tactical perspective." The Crimson Reaper seemed to respond to the increasingly relaxed atmosphere by becoming even more exploratory. It had begun investigating different students with gentle curiosity, approaching extended appendages with careful antenna touches that suggested genuine interest in understanding these strange new beings. When Wave cautiously offered one of her aquatic sensory organs, the creature's investigation was so gentle that she actually relaxed enough to allow closer contact. "Trust is exactly the right word," Alex agreed while watching their companions' peaceful interactions. "But it's not blind trust, it's earned trust based on understanding and respect. We learned to read the signals that meant a creature was stressed, territorial, or afraid. We developed ways to communicate non-threatening intentions. Most importantly, we learned to give dangerous creatures what they needed to feel safe." Professor Cole was frantically recording observations that would revolutionize xenobiological research throughout the galaxy. "The behavioral modifications you're describing suggest that aggressive responses in dangerous species might be largely environmental, rather than genetic. If we could replicate these human techniques with other problematic xenofauna," the implications were staggering as students began connecting Alex's examples to their own world's challenges with supposedly hostile species. Wave described deep ocean creatures her people avoided that might actually be seeking contact rather than isolation. Petal mentioned forest beings considered demonic that could potentially be misunderstood rather than malicious. Even Unit 47 began questioning whether certain mechanical species might be capable of peaceful coexistence if approached with different protocols. "The key insight," Alex continued, while their companion explored a particularly interesting scent, trail, "is that most aggressive behavior comes from fear, confusion, or unmet needs. When we address those underlying issues instead of just responding to the aggression itself, everything changed. Instead of enemies, we found partners, companions, and friends." 3 months after the incident that would later be recorded in galactic academic histories as the Great Reaper Revelation, the Xenobiology Department of the Galactic Academy had been completely transformed. Where once sterile containment fields and emergency protocols dominated the learning environment, Students now worked alongside previously dangerous species in carefully designed interaction spaces that prioritized understanding over fear. The changes were so dramatic that delegations from across the galaxy arrived weekly to observe the revolutionary teaching methods. Alex walked through the academy corridors with their companion, perched contentedly on their shoulder, drawing curious glances from visiting officials who still couldn't quite believe the reports they'd received. The creature they'd named Crimson had become something of a celebrity, though it seemed more interested in exploring new environments than basking in galactic attention. Today it was particularly fascinated by the bioluminescent patterns of some visiting Floranian diplomats, extending gentle antenna touches to investigate their unique photonic displays. Professor Cole had become the Academy's most sought-after researcher. His papers on behavioral modification through environmental understanding, revolutionizing how xenobiologists approached interspecies contact throughout known space. His office walls were now covered with collaboration requests from universities on dozens of worlds, all eager to implement the human protocol, developed through careful observation of Alex's techniques. The transformation has exceeded our most optimistic projections, Professor Cole explained to a delegation of Drakmor military officials who had arrived to investigate reports that their biological weapons were being used as classroom pets. We've successfully established peaceful contact with 17 species previously classified as immediate termination threats. The behavioral modifications required are remarkably simple once you understand the underlying psychology. Tan had been among the most dramatically changed by the experience. The proud warrior who had once advocated for immediate destruction of dangerous creatures now served as the Academy's specialist in threat de-escalation through cultural understanding. His unique combination of military tactical knowledge and newfound appreciation for interspecies empathy made him invaluable in designing safety protocols that protected everyone while allowing meaningful contact. The key realization, Tan explained to his former military colleagues, is that we were creating the very aggression we feared. By approaching these creatures with weapons and hostile intent, we triggered their defensive responses. When we changed our approach, they changed their behavior. Unit 47 had become fascinated by the emotional and psychological aspects of interspecies bonding, developing new analytical frameworks that incorporated empathy and understanding into logical decision-making processes. The android's research into emotional intelligence optimization was being studied by synthetic beings throughout the galaxy who sought to improve their interactions with organic species. Wave had returned to her homeworld with detailed protocols for peaceful contact with the deep ocean monsters her people had feared for millennia. Early reports suggested that several supposedly hostile species were actually attempting to communicate with Delphinian settlements, having been misunderstood for generations. Her success had inspired similar missions throughout the aquatic worlds. Of the outer system's petals, transformation was perhaps the most remarkable, as her naturally gentle Floranian psychology had adapted beautifully to interspecies mediation work. She had developed techniques for using her bioluminescent communication abilities to soothe stressed creatures from dozens of different worlds, becoming the galaxy's first certified xenofauna emotional therapist. The Crimson Reaper program had expanded beyond anyone's expectations as more specimens were brought to the Academy under carefully controlled conditions. Each individual creature displayed unique personality traits and preferences, thoroughly demolishing the old classification systems that had treated them as identical biological weapons. Some preferred social interaction with multiple species, while others formed strong bonds with individual humans or aliens. A few showed remarkable problem-solving abilities that suggested intelligence levels previously thought impossible in their species. Alex had become an unofficial consultant to the Galactic Council on Interspecies Relations, though they insisted on maintaining their regular student status rather than accepting the numerous prestigious positions offered by universities and research institutions. "I'm still learning," they would say when pressed about their revolutionary insights. "Every creature teaches me something new about how cooperation can work." The Academy's most successful innovation was the Partner Program, where students could apply to work long-term with individual creatures from supposedly dangerous species. These partnerships had produced breakthrough research in fields ranging from xenopsychology to interstellar ecology. Students learned to read behavioral cues, understand environmental needs, and develop communication methods that worked across species barriers. Crimson had become Alex's permanent companion, accompanying them to classes and living in specially designed quarters that accommodated both human and arthropod needs. The creature had developed what could only be described as a personality, showing preferences for certain foods, responding to its name, and displaying obvious affection for specific individuals. It had even learned to perform simple tasks that helped with Alex's studies, such as retrieving dropped objects or organizing research materials with surprising precision. The success stories were spreading throughout the galaxy as other institutions began implementing similar programs. Reports arrived weekly of successful peaceful contacts with species that had been considered irreconcilably hostile for centuries. Trade routes were reopening through regions previously considered too dangerous to traverse. Entire worlds that had been evacuated due to dangerous fauna were being resettled as scientists learned to work with indigenous species rather than against them. Professor Cole's latest research project involved establishing communication protocols with a species of crystalline beings that had been destroying mining operations for decades. Early results suggested that the creatures weren't attacking the miners, but rather trying to protect what they considered sacred geological formations. With proper communication and respect for their territorial needs, it appeared that mining and crystalline habitation could coexist peacefully. The Galactic Academy had become a pilgrimage site for beings seeking to understand how fear could be transformed into cooperation. Students arrived from the furthest reaches of known space to learn the techniques that had revolutionized interspecies relations. The waiting list for admission had grown so long that the Academy was planning to establish satellite campuses on dozens of worlds. As Alex walked through the transformed corridors with Crimson perched happily on their shoulder, they reflected on how much had changed since that day when a simple containment failure had revealed the power of approaching the unknown with curiosity rather than fear. The galaxy felt larger and more welcoming than ever before, filled with potential friends and partners rather than inevitable enemies. Every day brought new discoveries about the remarkable diversity of intelligence, emotion, and cooperation that existed throughout the cosmos, waiting to be understood by anyone willing to extend a gentle hand and offer patient friendship.